In the dust of 13th century West Africa, a prophecy was whispered about a boy who could not walk, a boy destined to become an emperor whose name would thunder through the ages. This is not just a legend of kings and conquests. It is a saga of Sundiata Keita, the Lion of Mali. His enemies mocked his weakness. His own family sought his death, but they had no idea the titan they were trying to break. Before the wells of Timbuktu, before the empires of Ghana and Songhai rose to power, there was Mali, a fractured land of warring clans, drowning in chaos. Into this world of strife, in 1217, a child was born who would change everything. His name was Sundiata. You won't find his full story in most history books. It has been carried for over 800 years by the Griots, the master storytellers of West Africa, passed from one generation to the next. This is the tale of destiny and defiance. It's about a mother's unbreakable love and a son's iron will. It reveals how the most humiliated among us can rise to become the most powerful. To grasp Sundiata's incredible ascent, we must begin with his greatest fall. Our story starts in the small kingdom of Niani, along the Niger River. This was the heartland of the Mandinka people, ruled by King Magan Konat, a man content with his peaceful domain. One day, two mysterious hunters arrived at his court. They were seers, wanderers who claimed to know the future. They delivered a stunning prophecy to the king. He would father a son who would become the greatest ruler the land had ever known, a boy who would unite all the warring kingdoms under a single banner. But there was a condition. The mother of this legendary child would not be one of Magan's current wives. She would be a woman known for her startling ugliness. Accepting her would require a profound leap of faith in the prophecy itself. King Magan was intrigued but skeptical. Who was this woman? The hunters soon presented Sogolan Keju. She was from the land of Dew, and she was exactly as described, hunchbacked, awkward, and outcast. The Griots say her appearance inspired pity, not desire. Yet, they also speak of a formidable spiritual essence within her. She was linked to the legendary buffalo of Dew, a terrifying creature slain in her homeland, and she seemed to carry its immense strengths. Despite his doubts and the court's quiet laughter, King Magan chose to trust the prophecy. He married Sogolan, though she would never be his favorite. His first wife, Sasuma Barrett, was beautiful, proud, and had already borne him a son named Dankaran Tumen. Sasuma saw Sogolan as no threat, just another unfortunate woman in the complex web of royal marriages. In time, Sogolan became pregnant. In 1217, she gave birth to a son. They named him Sundiata, meaning lion of the Sundiata clan, or in some tellings, hungering lion, a name that would prove terrifyingly accurate. The entire court waited for signs of greatness. Surely this prophesied child would be strong and charismatic from his first breath. Instead, they were met with a silence that would stretch for years. Sundiata did not walk, not at 1 year old, not at 2, not at 3. While other children ran and played, Sundiata could only crawl. His legs refused to support him. Whispers called him crippled. Others said he was cursed. The prophecy began to look like a cruel joke. Sasuma was delighted. She taunted Sogolan mercilessly. "Where is this great king you were promised?" She would sneer. I see only a crippled child who cannot even stand. Her own son, Dankaran, seemed the perfect heir, strong, healthy, everything a prince should be. Everyone agreed the prophecy must have been a mistake. But Sogolan never lost faith. As years passed and the mockery grew louder, as even the king began to doubt, she held firm. She would sit with her son, holding him, telling him stories of mighty warriors and wise kings. She reminded him of his destiny. She told him that a man's worth is measured by his finish, not his start. And Sundiata listened. A lion's spirit cannot be caged by weak limbs. Unable to walk, unable to join other children, he developed a formidable mind. He absorbed everything. He listened to the Griots sing histories of past rulers. He watched his father's court, learning the subtle dance of power. He understood, even as a child, that strength has many forms, but understanding and living are two different realities. For young Sundiata, life was about to become far more difficult. Imagine being a prince who cannot stand in the culture that glorifies warriors. Imagine being told you are destined for greatness while everyone around you sees only failure. This was Sundiata's childhood. By age 7, the humiliation was a constant burden. It came not just from Susuma, whose cruelty was relentless, but from the entire court. Children mocked him. Servants pitied him. His own father could not hide his disappointment. King Magan had once believed, but years of watching his son crawl had shattered that faith. So Golan bore the weight of this shame. As Sundiata's mother, she was blamed for his condition. Was she cursed? Had she angered the spirits? The questions were whispered just loud enough for her to hear. Through it all, she remained a pillar of strength for her son. The breaking point arrived on a day that began like any other. So Golan needed baobab leaves for a meal. These leaves are a staple in West African cooking. Normally, a servant would fetch them, but Susuma had forbidden the palace staff from helping Sogolan, a petty power play to remind her of her low status. So Golan had to ask women in the community for some of their gathered leaves. When Susuma heard of this, she saw a chance for maximum humiliation. She sent a public message to Sogolan, offering her baobab leaves, but with a vicious jab. Here are leaves for the mother of the child who cannot walk. At least my son can stand on his own feet to pick whatever I need. The insult echoed through the courtyard. So Golan returned to her dwelling, leaves in hand, tears streaming down her face. This was about more than leaves. It was about dignity. It was about watching her son suffer daily while she stood powerless. It was about a prophecy that felt more like a lie with each passing sunset. Sundiata saw his mother's tears, and in that moment, something inside the 7-year-old boy shattered, and then solidified into iron. He would stand, not tomorrow, not next year. Now, he called for the royal blacksmith, a man named Noun Fairy. "Make me an iron staff," Sundiata commanded, his voice carrying an authority that stunned those who heard it. "Make it from your strongest metal. I am going to stand." The blacksmith hesitated. He had seen the boy's condition, but something in the child's eyes compelled him to obey. He forged an enormous iron staff, so heavy that 3 grown men could barely lift it. It was a test, a challenge to see if this moment was real or just another fleeting hope. When the staff was brought forth, the court gathered. Word had spread. Everyone had to see what would happen. Would the crippled prince finally admit defeat? So Golan watched, her heart a storm of hope and terror. Sundiata grasped the iron staff with both hands. The Griots tell us he prayed to his ancestors, calling upon the spirits of all the great warriors who came before him. Then, with every ounce of strength in his small body, he pulled himself up. The staff bent under his weight. The supposedly unbreakable iron curved like a bow, but Sundiata did not fall. His legs, which had never held him, began to straighten. His knees found a strength they had never known. Slowly, impossibly, miraculously, Sundiata stood. The courtyard fell into a stunned silence. And then Sundiata took a step, then another. The bent iron staff straightened as his legs grew more powerful with each movement. He walked across the courtyard, and with each step, he seemed to grow, not just in height, but in presence. The crippled child was gone. In his place stood a young prince radiating undeniable power. He walked to a baobab tree, the very source of his mother's humiliation, with a strength that defied belief for a child who had never walked. He uprooted the entire tree. He carried it to his mother and laid it at her feet. "Here, mother," he said, "you will never need to beg for baobab leaves again." The court was speechless. Susuma was terrified, because in that moment, everyone remembered the prophecy. They had just witnessed the impossible. But destiny is a winding road, and Sundiata's true trials were only just beginning. Sundiata's miraculous recovery should have been a time of pure triumph, and for a brief, glorious moment, it was. The court celebrated. The Griots sang of the miracle. King Magan, seeing his son walk for the first time, wept with relief and joy. The prophecy was real, but not everyone was celebrating. Susuma Barrett watched with mounting dread. Her son, Dankaran Tuman, had been the clear heir. For 7 years, she had been certain of his future. The throne was his by right. The crippled half-brother had been no threat until now. As she watched the court's awe, as she saw the new respect in their eyes, she knew everything had changed. The prophecy was unfolding before her. If Sundiata continued to grow in strength and reputation, her son's claim would be challenged, maybe even destroyed. Susuma would not allow this. She began to plot. Her first strategy was subtle, poisoning the king's mind against Sundiata. She whispered doubts. "Yes, the boy can walk now. But is that truly evidence of a prophecy? Perhaps it was just a late development. Dankaran is still the elder. Tradition must be honored." She warned the king that changing the succession could spark civil war among the Mandinka. Her words found their mark. King Magan, though proud of Sundiata, was a practical ruler. He knew overturning tradition based on a prophecy would be dangerous. He began to waver, but Susuma wasn't content with mere political maneuvering. She wanted Sundiata eliminated completely. As long as he lived, he was a threat. She turned to darker methods, seeking out witches and sorcerers who dealt in curses and spiritual assassination. She offered them gold, power, anything to eliminate the prophesied child. Several attempts were made. Poison was placed in his food, but Sundiata did not eat it. Curses were laid on his path, but they slid off him like water. It was as if he was protected by a force beyond the physical world. Some Griots say it was the spirit of the buffalo his mother carried. Others say it was a will of the ancestors. Whatever the source, Sundiata survived every attempt on his life. During this time, Sundiata was blossoming into an extraordinary young man. Having learned to walk, he seemed to be making up for lost time. He became strong, not just in body, but in character. He was generous where others were selfish, humble where others were arrogant. He made friends easily, and those friends became fiercely loyal. He hunted with skill, fought with courage, and demonstrated a natural charisma that drew people to him. He also possessed a gift for understanding people. Those years of observing from the ground had taught him to read character, to see past masks. He knew who was genuine and who was false. He understood power dynamics instinctively, and he never forgot those who had shown his mother kindness in their darkest days. His closest companions would stay with him for life. There was Bala Faske, son of the royal Griot, who became Sundiata's personal historian and trusted advisor. There was his half-sister Nana Triban, who remained loyal despite family pressures. And there were friends from all walks of life, hunters, warriors, even the children of slaves. Sundiata judged people by their hearts, not their births. This quality made him beloved among common people, but it worried the nobility. A prince who befriended everyone, who treated slaves as equals, who questioned old ways. This was dangerous not because he was cruel, but because he was revolutionary. Then, when Sundiata was still a teenager, King Magan fell ill. The sickness came suddenly and progressed fast. Within weeks, the king was dying. On his deathbed, he faced his most critical decision. Who would succeed him? He called his council together. He summoned both his wives, and he made his choice. Despite the prophecy, despite Sundiata's obvious qualities, King Magan chose tradition. He named Dankaran Tumen as his heir. The reasons were complex. Partly it was Susuma's influence. Partly it was political calculation. Dankaran was older, and his claim was less controversial. But perhaps most importantly, Magan feared what would happen to Sundiata if he named him heir. He knew Susuma would never accept it. He knew there would be conflict, possibly assassination. By naming Dankaran, he hoped to protect Sundiata by making him seem less threatening. It was a father's final attempt to shield his prophesied son, but it would prove to be a catastrophic error. King Magan died shortly after, and Dankaran Tumen became king. He was young, inexperienced, and utterly controlled by his mother. And Susuma, who had lived in fear for her son's position, now had the power to eliminate that fear forever. She convinced Dankaran that as long as Sundiata lived, his rule would never be secure. The prophecy still hung in the air. People still remembered the miracle of Sundiata's walking. There would always be those who believed the wrong son sat on the throne. There was only one solution. Sundiata must die. Dankaran, weak and manipulated, agreed. But executing a popular prince, especially one protected by prophecy, was not simple. It had to look like an accident, or he had to be exiled to a death in obscurity. Assassins were hired, plans were laid. So Golan, who understood the politics of the court better than anyone knew, realized what was happening. She had to save her son. There was only one way. They had to leave, not just the palace, but Niani itself. They had to go into exile before Susuma's plots could succeed. It was a terrible choice. Sundiata was a prophesied king. This was his kingdom. By leaving, he was abandoning his destiny. But Sogolan understood a crucial truth. You cannot fulfill a prophecy if you are not alive to see it dawn. Sometimes survival demands a strategic retreat. The lion may step back from the hunt, but only to strike with greater force later. And so, under the cover of darkness, Sogolan prepared for the most painful journey of her life. She was taking her son into exile, away from his birthright, away from his destiny. She was choosing life over certainty, hope over a doomed stand. She was saving the Lion King by teaching him how to run. The night they fled Niani, Sundiata was still a teenager. He had lived his whole life in the palace, surrounded by servants, protected by his father's name. Now he was being forced to flee like a criminal, to abandon everything he knew because his own brother wanted him dead. Sogolan gathered her children, not just Sundiata, but his younger siblings as well, like his sister Sogolan Kalankan and his brother Mandingbori. They packed only what they could carry without raising suspicion. Gold and valuables were left behind. Taking them would signal their intent. They departed with almost nothing. But they did not leave alone. Bala Faske wanted to join them, but Sogolan made him stay. This was a critical decision. Bala Faske remained in Niani as Sundiata's eyes and ears in the court, a connection to his homeland that would prove vital later. A few loyal servants and warriors who believed in the prophecy also risked everything to accompany the exiled family into an unknown future. Their first destination was a nearby kingdom of Jiba. They hoped to find refuge with its king, perhaps even military support to return and claim the rightful throne. But word traveled fast. Susuma, discovering their escape, had sent messages to neighboring kingdoms. The exiled prince was dangerous. His mother was a witch. Anyone who harbored them would be considered an enemy of Niani. The king of Jiba, faced with this ultimatum, chose self-preservation. He offered them shelter for a few days, gave them some supplies, and then politely asked them to leave. He would not risk war for a displaced prince with no army and no power. It was the first of many rejections. For the next several years, some traditions say 7, others say up to 13. Sundiata and his family wandered through West Africa, seeking refuge and finding only temporary sanctuary. They traveled to Taban, to Ouagadougou, to various small kingdoms and tribal lands. Each time, the pattern repeated. Initial welcome based on traditional hospitality, growing unease as the hosts realized who they were, and finally a request, sometimes polite, sometimes not, for them to move on. The exile years were brutal, especially for Sogolan. She was no longer young, and the constant travel, the uncertainty, the sight of her children going hungry, wore her down. But she never complained. She never showed doubt. To the very end, she held fast to her faith in her son's destiny. Sundiata, meanwhile, was learning lessons no palace education could provide. He learned true humility, what it meant to be powerless, to depend on the charity of others. He learned to discern people's true intentions, to separate genuine hospitality from tolerance born of fear. He learned patience, understanding that destiny unfolds on its own schedule, not ours. He also learned about the wider world. Each kingdom they visited had its own customs, political structures, strengths, and flaws. Sundiata absorbed it all. He was learning to think not just as a Mandinka prince, but as a man who understood the complex tapestry of West African politics. And he made friends, despite being in exile with no power or wealth to offer. Sundiata's character drew people to him. In every kingdom, he befriended warriors, hunters, and princes who were impressed by his essence, not his status. These relationships, forged in obscurity, would become the foundation of his future army. But there was deep pain too. The family's poverty was relentless. There were times they went hungry, times they had to beg for food. For a prince raised in a palace, for children who had known only comfort, this was a harsh education in hardship. Sundiata watched his mother's health decline. He saw his younger siblings suffer, and he could do nothing but endure and promise himself that one day, things would be different. The psychological toll was perhaps worse than the physical deprivation. Sundiata lived with the knowledge that his own brother wanted him dead, that his father had chosen tradition over destiny, that he was in exile from the very kingdom he was prophesied to rule. It would have shattered a weaker person. It could have filled him with bitter rage and a thirst for revenge. But Sundiata did not break. Instead, he focused on becoming worthy of the prophecy. He trained constantly, honing his strengths and combat skills. He studied leadership by observing the kings who hosted them, noting what made a ruler effective and what led to failure. He treated everyone with respect, from the highest noble to the lowest servant, building a reputation as a person of exceptional character. One of their longer stops was in the kingdom of Mima, far to the north of Niani. The king of Mima, Musa, was different. He was older, wiser, and powerful enough that he didn't fear Susuma's threats. He welcomed Sundiata and his family. More than that, he recognized something special in the exiled prince. In Mima, Sundiata found something he hadn't known in years: stability. He was given a position in the king's army, a chance to prove himself not as a prince, but as a warrior and leader. And prove himself he did. Sundiata distinguished himself in battle and in hunts, in every test of skill and courage. He became one of King Tunkara's most valued commanders. The king, who had no sons, began to see Sundiata as a potential heir. He offered him everything: a permanent home, wealth, power, even the possibility of inheriting the kingdom of Mima. For someone who had spent years wandering in suffering, this was an incredible opportunity. But it was not his destiny, and Sundiata knew it. During these years of exile, Sogolan never let him forget the prophecy. Even in their suffering, even when a return to Niani seemed impossible, she reminded him, "You are not just any prince. You are the prophesied one. Mali waits for you, even if it does not yet know it." And then, after years of wandering, after years of seeming obscurity, news arrived that would change everything. News from Niani, news of a new and terrifying threat that made all the old rivalries suddenly meaningless. A sorcerer king named Soumaoro had risen from the land of Soso, and he was conquering everything in his path. To understand what happened next, we need to see what had been unfolding in West Africa during Sundiata's exile. The region was a patchwork of dozens of small kingdoms and chiefdoms, constantly competing for resources and power. This had been the status quo for generations, a collection of minor states, none powerful enough to dominate the others, existing in an uneasy balance of rivalries and alliances. But nature abhors a vacuum. Into this fractured political landscape emerged a man who would shatter the balance. Soumaoro, king of Soso. Soumaoro was not like other rulers. He was a blacksmith by training, which in West African society held special meaning. Blacksmiths were seen as possessing unique powers. Working with fire and iron, transforming raw materials into tools and weapons, existing in the liminal space between the physical and spiritual worlds. But Soumaoro was more than a blacksmith. He was a sorcerer, a practitioner of dark magic who had spent decades amassing spiritual power. The Griots describe him as terrifying in appearance and demeanor, tall, with eyes that seemed to pierce through a person, a voice that could make warriors tremble. He wore ornaments made from the bones of his slain enemies. His palace was said to be filled with the instruments of his magic, drums of human skin, fetishes that gave him power over life and death. Whether these descriptions are literal or symbolic, the point is clear. Soumaoro inspired absolute terror, and he used that terror as a weapon as potent as his armies. Starting from Soso, a kingdom in what is now Guinea, Soumaoro began a campaign of conquest unlike anything the region had witnessed. He attacked neighboring kingdoms one by one, using a blend of military force and psychological warfare. Those who resisted were brutally crushed. Those who submitted were absorbed into his growing empire, treated as subjects, not partners. Within a few years, Soumaoro had conquered vast territories. Then he turned his gaze to Niani, the heartland of the Mandinka people, Sundiata's homeland. Dankaran Tumen, who had never been a strong or wise king, was utterly unprepared for this threat. When Soumaoro's armies appeared on his borders, Dankaran panicked. He tried to negotiate, offering tribute and submission. But Soumaoro wanted more than submission. He wanted total control. The Griots tell us Soumaoro made impossible demands. He required not just gold and supplies, but humiliating acts of subservience. He demanded that Dankaran send him Bala Faske, Sundiata's Griot, as a hostage. Dankaran, desperate to avoid war, agreed to everything, but surrender only emboldened Soumaoro. Seeing Dankaran's weakness, he decided to take Niani by force anyway. His armies invaded, and what followed was a brutal defeat. The Mandinka warriors, demoralized by their king's cowardice and facing Soumaoro's seemingly invincible forces, were quickly overwhelmed. Dankaran Tumen fled. The king who had usurped his brother's throne, who had driven Sundiata into exile, who had ruled Niani for years, ran away in the face of invasion. He abandoned his people, his kingdom, everything. Some accounts say he died in exile, broken and forgotten. Others say he lived out his days in obscurity and shame. Either way, his reign ended not with dignity, but with desertion. Niani fell under Soumaoro's control, and a dark period began for the Mandinka people. Soumaoro ruled not as a king, but as a tyrant. He imposed crushing taxes. He conscripted young men into his armies. He showed no respect for local customs or traditions. The land of the Mandinka, once proud and independent, was now just another province in Soumaoro's empire. But worse than the political control was a spiritual oppression. Soumaoro's sorcery made him seem invincible. Warriors who had fought bravely for years suddenly found themselves unable to resist. Arrows that should have struck him missed. Spears that should have pierced him bounced away. It was as if he was protected by forces beyond human understanding. The Mandinka people began to lose hope. They had been conquered before, but there had always been the possibility of rebellion, of eventual liberation. But how do you fight a sorcerer king who cannot be killed by normal means? How do you resist someone who commands dark powers? And then, in their darkest hour, they remembered the prophecy. They remembered the prince exiled years ago. The one who was supposed to become their greatest king. The one who had walked after being crippled. Who had uprooted a baobab tree with his bare hands. Who had shown them that the impossible was possible. They remembered Sundiata. Messengers were sent out, traveling to every kingdom where Sundiata might have taken refuge. They carried a plea from the free Mandinka people who remained. Come back, we need you. The prophecy must be fulfilled, or we will remain slaves forever. One of these messengers eventually reached Mima, where Sundiata had been living in relative comfort and honor. The messenger found him training with King Tunkara's warriors and delivered the devastating news. Niani had fallen. Soumaoro Kant had conquered the Mandinka homeland. The people were suffering under tyranny, and they were calling for Sundiata to return. Sundiata listened in silence. Years of exile, years of wandering and suffering, and now this a chance to return. But not as a conqueror reclaiming his throne from a usurping brother, but as a liberator fighting an enemy far more dangerous than Dankaran had ever been. King Tunkara watched his reaction carefully. He had come to love Sundiata like a son, and he knew that if the prince returned to Niani, he would likely never come back to Mima. He would lose his best warrior, possibly his heir. But he also recognized destiny when he saw it. This is what you were meant for, King Tunkara said. Not to be my heir, but to be your own king. Go save your people, fulfill your prophecy. It was an act of extraordinary generosity, but more than that, it was necessary. Soumaoro Kant wasn't just a threat to the Mandinka. If left unchecked, he would eventually threaten Mima and every other kingdom in the region. Someone had to stop him, and perhaps only the prophesied king could do it. But Sundiata faced an immense problem. He had no army. He was one man, however strong and skilled. To fight Soumaoro, he would need warriors, weapons, supplies, and allies. He would need to build from nothing the force that could liberate his people. And his mother, who had guided him through years of exile, would not live to see it. Before Sundiata could begin his campaign to return to Niani, he faced a loss that would mark him forever. So Golan, his mother, the woman who had never lost faith in him, who had endured mockery, exile, and poverty for his sake, fell gravely ill. The years of wandering had taken their final toll. She was no longer young. The constant stress, the inadequate food, the endless uncertainty, it had all worn down her body. By the time the messenger arrived from Niani, Golan was already weakening. And when she heard the news, when she understood that her son would finally return to claim his destiny, something in her relaxed, as if she had been holding on only to witness this moment. Sundiata stayed by her side as she declined. For days, he barely left her dwelling. This woman had been his anchor through everything. As she lay dying, Sogolan gave her son her final instructions. The Griots have preserved her words across the centuries. She told him, "Remember who you are. Remember where you come from. Do not become cruel in your strengths. Do not forget those who suffer, for you have suffered. Do not become proud in victory, for you know the taste of defeat. And most importantly, trust in the prophecy. No matter how impossible the situation seems, no matter how powerful your enemies appear, remember that your destiny was spoken before you were born. You are the Lion King of Mali." She also gave him practical counsel. She told him which allies to trust and which to watch. She reminded him of the debts they owed to people who had helped them during exile, debts of honor that must be repaid. She explained the political landscape as she saw it, which kingdoms might join his cause, which were too afraid of Soumaoro to help. And then, was her children around her, was the son she had fought so hard to protect holding her hand. Sogolan died. For Sundiata, it was a devastating blow. His mother had been the one constant through all the upheavals of his life. When he couldn't walk, she believed he would. When his father chose his brother, she knew it was temporary. When they were exiled and homeless, she never despaired. She had been his strength when he had none of his own. Now she was gone, just as he was about to embark on the greatest challenge of his life. The Griots say Sundiata wept for 3 days, not just tears of sorrow, but of profound gratitude, because he understood what his mother had sacrificed for him. She had given everything: her comfort, her status, her health, her very life, to ensure he would survive long enough to fulfill the prophecy. She had been the shield that protected him when he was vulnerable, the voice that encouraged him when he doubted, the face that sustained him when faith seemed foolish. King Tunkara gave Sogolan a royal burial, honoring her as the mother of a prophesied king. Warriors from across Mima attended. Even in exile, in a foreign kingdom, she was recognized for what she was, a woman of extraordinary courage and unwavering love. After the burial, Sundiata changed. Those who knew him said a new intensity burned within him, a fierce determination that hadn't been there before. His mother's death had erased the last vestiges of hesitation and doubt. He was no longer just a displaced prince hoping to return home. He was a man on a mission, carrying the weight of his mother's sacrifice, driven by something deeper than personal ambition. He was ready to become what the prophecy had always said he would be. But first, he had to build an army. Sundiata began his campaign not with weapons, but with words and relationships. He understood a crucial truth: you cannot defeat a powerful enemy alone. You need allies, people who believe in your cause enough to risk everything. And Sundiata had been preparing for this moment his entire exile, perhaps without even realizing it. Remember all those friendships he had made during the wandering years. All those warriors and hunters and princes who had been impressed by his character. All those people who had helped his family when they had nothing to offer in return. Now was the time to call in those debts of honor and friendship. King Tunkara was his first and most vital ally. The king not only released Sundiata from his service but provided him with an initial force of warriors. It wasn't a huge army, but it was a start. He also gave weapons, supplies, and his blessing. This was crucial because it granted Sundiata legitimacy. He wasn't just a wandering exile anymore. He had the backing of a powerful king. But Tunkara's support came with wisdom. He told Sundiata, "I can give you warriors, but I cannot give you all the men you need. Soumaoro's forces are vast. You must gather allies from across the land. And you must do it quickly before Soumaoro learns what you're planning and crushes you before you're ready." Sundiata took this advice to heart. He began traveling again, but this time not as a refugee seeking shelter. This time, he traveled as a leader gathering support for a cause. His message was simple but powerful. Soumaoro Kant was not just a threat to the Mandinka people. He was a threat to everyone. Today he rules Niani. Tomorrow he could rule your kingdom. Unite now to stop him, or fall one by one later. It was a compelling argument. But words alone don't convince kings to commit their warriors to another's war. Sundiata needed to offer something more, and he did. He promised that any kingdom that helped him defeat Soumaoro would be part of a new alliance, a confederation of equals, not conquered subjects. He wasn't asking them to serve him. He was inviting them to build something new together. This was revolutionary thinking. In that era, conquest usually meant total control, winner takes all. But Sundiata was proposing something different: shared power, mutual benefit, collective security. It was an idea born from his exile, from seeing how fragmented kingdoms were vulnerable, from understanding that true strength came from unity, not subjugation. His first major recruitment success was in Taban, a kingdom he had passed through during his exile. The king of Taban remembered Sundiata, remembered his character, his bearing, the respect he showed everyone even when he had nothing. When Sundiata returned and explained his mission, the king committed warriors to the cause. Then came the kingdom of Sibi, then Ouagadougou, the remnant of the old Ghana Empire. Each success made the next easier because word spread. The exiled prince was gathering an army. The prophesied king was returning. And crucially, he was winning people to his cause not through threats or bribes, but through the force of his vision and character. But the most important recruitment wasn't of a kingdom. It was of individuals. Sundiata went to regions known for their legendary warriors and hunters, men of exceptional skill and courage. He sought them out personally, often in dramatic fashion. One famous story tells of Sundiata traveling to meet a warrior renowned for being undefeated in combat. This warrior was skeptical. Why should he join some exiled prince's seemingly hopeless cause? Sundiata challenged him to a contest. If Sundiata won, the warrior would join him. The warrior agreed, confident of victory. They wrestled, and Sundiata won. But then, in a gesture that won the warrior's complete loyalty, Sundiata declared the match too close to call and that they should consider themselves equals. The warrior, moved by this humility and generosity, not only joined Sundiata but brought dozens of other fighters with him. Another crucial alliance was with the hunter confederations. In West African society, hunters were more than just trackers of game. They were mystics, experts in spiritual matters, people who understood the unseen forces of nature. They were organized into societies with their own leaders and codes of honor, and they despised Soumaoro, who had disrupted the spiritual balance of the land with his dark sorcery. When Sundiata approached them, they saw something important. Here was someone who could potentially match Soumaoro's spiritual power. Because Sundiata wasn't just physically strong, he carried the protection of the prophecy, the blessing of his mother's buffalo spirit. The hunters believed he had a chance against the Sorcerer King, and they pledged their support. As weeks turned to months, Sundiata's force grew. It wasn't yet an army capable of facing Soumaoro's full might, but it was no longer just a handful of warriors. He had thousands of fighters now, drawn from across West Africa, united by a common cause and by faith in the prophesied king. But gathering an army was only half the challenge. The other half was preparing them for what was coming, because fighting Soumaoro wasn't like fighting a normal enemy. His sorcery made him seemingly invincible. Arrows missed, spears bent. Warriors who should have been victorious found themselves mysteriously weakened in his presence. How do you fight someone like that? Sundiata needed to understand Soumaoro's power, to find its source and its weakness. Because every power, no matter how great, has a limit. Every invincibility has a vulnerability. He needed to find Soumaoro's, and that's where Bala Faske came in. The Griot who had stayed behind in Niani all those years ago. While Sundiata had been in exile, Bala Faske had remained in Niani, serving whoever ruled it. First Dankaran Tumen, then Soumaoro Kant. This might seem like betrayal, but it wasn't. Griots had a special status in West African society. They were historians, advisors, and truth-tellers, but they were also bound to serve whoever held power. A Griot's loyalty was ultimately to the preservation of history and culture, which meant surviving political changes. But Bala Faske had never forgotten his true master. All those years even. Thank you for watching. Please like video and subscribe the channel.